band called Marillion. I don't know if any of you know Marillion or Marillion fans. Over here we have Mark Kelly, their keyboard player. Mark was kind of an early internet user. He had his nice 56 baud modem around 1990, and he logged onto the internet and he thought it was really great. And one night he was backstage, and somebody he knew came up to him with a stack of paper and said, "Hey, these are printouts from a mailing list of Marillion fans, and they're all talking about you." And he thought this was super interesting, so he went home that night and he found the group and he became a subscriber. And he lurked for a couple of years. And then, as he told me, at some point somebody said something that was so wrong that he had to bust in and correct them. At which point they immediately said, "How come you never tour North America?" Most of the fans were Canadian or from the United States. They were from England. And his reply was, "Well, we'd love to tour North America, but we'd need 60,000 pounds to do it, and we haven't got enough of an audience there to pay for that, and the record label won't put it up. That's why we don't tour North America." And so one of the fans said, "Well, what if we opened an account and we put it in escrow and we raised 60,000 pounds, then would you come to America?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." Much to his surprise, they did, at which point he had to tell the rest of the band. So they went and they did the tour of North America, and one of the things that he found was that as they went around the country touring, this story of how the fans had raised the money became an important promotional tour. And as he told me, it was the point at which he realized the power that rabid fans could have on the internet. This story of Marillion's crowdfunding is often held up as the first example of crowdfunding. It was early, it was 96 when they did the tour, so it was very early. What often gets lost in that story is the fact that it was the fans' idea, not the band's idea. But what we have now is a context in which there's an expectation that musicians and other creative artists of various types and other people of various types should be monetizing their fans. So we have here a collection of headlines about monetizing. The cash cow waiting to be milked is my favorite as a fan, because I like to think of myself as a cash cow waiting to be milked. It really speaks to the love I have of music. Obviously some really kind of problematic language when we start thinking about fans as cows to be milked. But nonetheless, this has become kind of a key concept in the music industry, but more broadly in thinking about relating to audiences. You relate to them so that you can then monetize them and therefore keep your career going. If you think about, well, what does that mean to monetize your fans? MTV did a study of millennials some years ago, music to the M power, M being millennial. This was a 2012 study, I believe. And a couple of the findings that they came up with, one was this idea that they called zero distancing. Artists are expected to be constantly accessible, especially on social media, offering unique and intimate moments to their fans. So right away, in thinking about identity, you can see this erasure of the star identity from the, quote, intimate identity. The private self is meant to be not just on display, but constantly on display. And the artist is not supposed to be your idol anymore. The artist is supposed to be your, quote, friend. This is the MTV's language, not mine. They write, "Today there's an expectation for direct interaction between fans and musicians. Millennials crave intimate glimpses into mundane daily activities of their favorite celebrities." We can argue about whether that's true or false, but this is a finding from quite a large study. So we have this real shift. If you think about the days of early Rolling Stones or some of those big rock bands, the last thing you wanted was intimate glimpses of their daily life. You wanted them to be larger than life. Or as a musician told me, they used to drop down from the sky every 4 years and we were just happy they let us buy their albums, and now we have to be telling them what we had for breakfast. So why look at music if you're interested in issues of contemporary labor? My contention is that this is not just about music, but the reason to look at music is that music is, as the French theorist Jacques Attali has talked about, a predictive social science, by which he means that what happens in music tends to happen later in the rest of culture, that music is sort of a bellwether for which way the wind is going to blow, and when we see what's happening in music, we get a sense of where things are going. And this is, oops, a little fast there. This is true of labor, but it's true more broadly as well. Georgina Bourne talks about music inflecting existing social relations from the most concrete and intimate to the most abstract of collectivities. She talks about music embodying the nation, social hierarchy, structures of class, race, gender, and sexuality, broader institutional forces, market exchange, public and subsidized cultural institutions, or late capitalism's multipolar cultural economy. So the point here is that music not only does not exist in a vacuum, but it encodes, in a sense, all of these different dynamics of cultural order. And as it changes, so too do those dynamics of cultural order. I think you see really clearly the way that music speaks to changes in the economy if you consider the phrase, the gig economy, right? And here we have a recent post from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the American federal government organization that studies and creates policy about labor. And they talk about working in the gig economy. And in the first sentence of this article, posted just this last May, Ryan Heenan works wherever. He's a songwriter. We'll note that the Bureau of Labor Statistics goes right to songwriting to exemplify the gig economy. Who sells customized jingles and videos online to clients worldwide. Quote, "It's really a dream come true," says Heenan. "It gives me the freedom to set my own hours, and I can do what I want anywhere there's an internet connection." So this speaks to sort of this idealized idea of the gig economy of flexibility and autonomy, the ability to be in charge of your own career. What it doesn't mention, at least not in that first sentence, is sort of the flip side of this, which is the constant searching for the next job and all of the challenges that entails, the constant work to ensure that you're going to get paid when you haven't got an employer who owes you a paycheck at the end of the week. This particular project of mine has been based on many years now of both interviewing musicians and also speaking at music industry events to musicians and to people who work with musicians, attending those events, reading the music press, all of those kinds of things. But the heart of it is these semi-structured interviews with about 40, I think I was at 39 musicians from a variety of genres. Most of them, probably all of them, except for one jazz musician, were people who in an earlier time would have expected to be able to make a living on selling recordings. And that is an anomaly in the music business for professional musicians. Most professional musicians are people like orchestra players who don't expect to be able to sell their albums in order to make money. It's always been a fairly small segment of musicians who expect to make money from sales, and yet that has become sort of when people hear musicians, unless you are one, that tends to be what you think is these people who sell their recordings of their music. And obviously that's an industry that's been profoundly disrupted by contemporary digital technology. Out of this interviews trying to talk about these questions of how do they understand their interactions with their audiences, how do they understand their relationships with their audiences in a time when they're being told to connect in order to monetize. What does that connection mean to them? So I was trying to kind of steer clear of the monetizing part and focus primarily on the connect part. Connect, engage, and monetize was the theme of one of the first conferences that I went to about this. And what came out of this in trying to talk about what they were doing, what they saw themselves as doing, I found that the way to talk about it that made the most sense was to think about this as a form of relational labor. And what I mean by relational labor is this regular, consistent engagement in this interpersonal practice of relationship building. overtime, but in association with your professional identity. So when we're on Facebook chatting with our friends, we're doing relational work, and somebody is actually profiting from it. But we're not doing it in order to foster our careers. To the extent that we are, we could call that relational labor. So if you're making Facebook friends with people you hope will hire you and becoming friends with them in hopes it will get you a job, then I would consider that a form of relational labor. This shifts things in some ways from, say, a concept like emotional labor, which we were talking about yesterday, which is very focused on what facial expressions or what emotional expressions do you offer in the moment to a person you may well never see again, toward thinking about it in terms of what kinds of interpersonal communication and relational skills do you have to use over time in order to build these ongoing connections that will lead people to remain interested in you, even if Rolling Stone isn't doing a big cover story on you. And when I think about relational labor, what I find, which does not surprise me as an interpersonal communication theorist, is that it's dialectical. And what I mean by that, I draw very heavily on this wonderful book and other work by Leslie Baxter and Barbara Montgomery on what they call the dialectical theory of interpersonal relationships, or relational dialectics. And of course, this draws on Marx, it draws on Bakhtin, especially on Bakhtin. They're very influenced by Bakhtin, as am I. Now, if we think about interpersonal relationship theory, and I won't go too deep into this, but relationships were often conceived as a series of stages where you began as strangers, and as you communicated, you disclosed more and more about yourself, and you became more and more interdependent, and eventually you bonded, and then you were kind of done. And what this did was to shift that thinking from you go up the stairs and then you're at the top of the stairs and maybe you have to go back down the stairs and get divorced, to, even when you're at the top of the stairs, having a relationship is still a dynamic process and it's still a challenge. So they talk about social life existing in and through people's communicative practices, by which people give voice to multiple, perhaps even infinite, opposing tendencies. Social life is an unfinished, ongoing dialogue in which a polyphony of dialectical voices struggle against one another to be heard, and in that struggle they set the stage for future struggles. So rather than viewing relational labor as just a thing you do, I view it as a struggle between competing tensions that pull you in opposing directions that are never really fully resolved, but always require strategic management. And this is true in all of our close relationships. And it's true in relational labor. So, with that as a background, here's my sneak preview for what's